this is McCoy. Welcome back to another week of Library at Home. I miss you guys so much, and I'm so very grateful that I get to make these videos because I feel like I can still connect with you even though we can't really be together at the library. But we still have these little moments together where you get to watch the library video and we get to share these books. And I'm excited because I have a bunch of books for the end of the year that I was really looking forward to sharing with you guys. And ours for today is a picture book biography, so it's a true story of someone's life. It's called The Girl Who Ran. It's by Bobbi Gibb, the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. So this is written by Frances Poletti and Kristina Yee, and the illustrations are by Susanna Chapman. I really like these watercolor illustrations. They're super cool. The Girl Who Ran. This story I wanted to share with you because I knew that for a long time women and men weren't treated equally in a lot of different ways, but I had no idea about this particular situation and how women were treated unequally in running as a sport. So let's find out what happened. Here's our title page. Now, her name is Bobbi, Bobbi spelled with an I. So she is a girl, but her name is Bobbi, just so that doesn't confuse you. Bobbi loved to run. Into the woods, over the hills, through fields and by streams, Bobbi's feet flew across the earth. All of her friends ran and played too, until one day they stopped. Bobbi missed her friends, but her legs would not be still. Whenever she ran, the world seemed to disappear, and only one sound filled her ears. So she ran with her pack, going higher and higher, just her and the sound of the wind in the fire. Do you have a sport or an activity like that? That when you're doing it, the rest of the world seems to disappear? Like all your troubles melt away and you're just focused on what you're doing? That's what running is like for Bobbi. One day, when Bobbi was grown, her father took her to Boston, where she saw not a few, not a dozen, but hundreds of people moving as one, kindred spirits, all running miles together. Bobbi knew she had to be a part of it. But her parents were afraid. Girls can't run marathons, don't you know that? What a strange idea. Don't be so silly. It's so unladylike. Mighty odd hobby for a girl. Good girls don't run. You'll get hurt. All Bobbi knew was that her legs wanted to move. She went to the woods to think. Can I run that far? Bobbi asked herself as her feet started pounding the ground. I have to try. She ran further and further, and she ached and perspired, and the world whooshed on by like the wind in the fire. So Bobbi left home with a secret plan. Away from her parents' disapproving eyes, she would train for the marathon. She traveled across the country, running in a new place every day. She ran through lush forests in Ohio and Indiana, vast plains in Nebraska and Kansas, majestic mountains in Wyoming and Montana. She ran with wild horses across sweeping valleys and stood on rocky mountain peaks. At night, she would set up camp and lie on the ground, close to the earth, tired and happy. She kept running every day, becoming stronger and stronger. Then a letter arrived that made her stop in her tracks. Her application for the marathon had been rejected. Not allowed. Women cannot run marathons. It's against the rules. Not possible. Long distance. What if you injure yourself? The rules are there for a reason. but Bobbi was determined to run. She said she would do it. She wasn't a liar. She'd show them by running like the wind in the fire. She returned home and told her parents of her plans. "Have you gone crazy?" cried her dad. Bobbi knew he wouldn't be the only one to think so. If she couldn't run as a woman, she would have to blend in with the men. She bought a pair of men's running shoes, the only kind there was, because they didn't make any for girls. She borrowed her brother's Bermuda shorts and found a shapeless baggy sweatshirt to wear over her black swimsuit. As Bobbi pulled up the hood, her long hair was hidden and the disguise was complete. Bobbi needed a ride to the starting line, but her dad refused. He stormed out of the house and everything was quiet. She didn't know what to do. Then there was a knock at Bobbi's door. "Let's go," her mom said. Bobbi's mom left her at the starting line. After running a few miles to warm up, Bobbi looked for a place to hide until the race started. Her heart beat faster and faster. Would she get caught? Bang! The race had begun. She sprang from the bushes. Hundreds of feet were hitting the ground, and Bobbi's were among them. So she ran with the pack, going higher and higher, the world whooshing by like the wind in the fire. Soon Bobbi heard murmurs. She'd been spotted. She nervously turned to look at the men running around her, but they were all smiles. "Hey, are you running the whole way?" one asked. "I hope so," said Bobbi, but she was getting hot. "I'm afraid I'll get thrown out if I take my sweatshirt off." The men around her replied, "We won't let anyone throw you out. It's a free road." They were on her side. Bobbi grinned and she took off her sweatshirt. Word spread quickly through the course. A girl was running. They couldn't believe it. The cheers were a roar, and Bobbi needed it. The ground was hard, her new shoes were stiff, and the final hill was still ahead. "It's a girl! Go, girl, go! Do us proud! Show them how it's done! You're my hero! Amazing! Don't stop now! We're all behind you! Keep going!" But she couldn't stop now, though she ached and perspired, and the world whooshed on by like the wind in the fire. Bobbi gritted her teeth as the road began to rise up before her. Closing her eyes, she imagined she was back in Montana, running up the mountains, the soft earth under her feet. Her throat burned from thirst, and every step was agony to her blistered feet. It was time for the last push. 30 steps, then 20, then 10, and the finish line. If you can see, I'll hold it this way so you can see. There's crowds of people cheering behind her, but there's a whole bunch of police officers waiting for her on the other side of the finish line. Bobbi had done it. She was caught up in a whirlwind of reporters, radio presenters, and photographers. History had been made. Hearts and minds were forever changed. The next day, Bobbi woke up early. Everything was quiet and still. 2 days earlier, the world had thought it was impossible for a woman to run a marathon. What else could be proven wrong? Bobbi was looking forward to finding out. She put on her shoes and headed out into the woods, running down familiar paths. She ran with a strength only hope can inspire, just her and the sound of the wind in the fire. And here is a timeline of not just Bobbi Gibbs' life, but also the Boston Marathon and women in sports. So I'll zoom in here. And by zoom in, I mean hold the picture up to the camera for you. So that's Bobbi. That's a real photo of her. And here is a photo of her wearing her brother's shorts and her black swimsuit as the first woman ever to complete the Boston Marathon. That's that moment right there. So it says in 1966, Roberta Bobbi Gibb became the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. She did so after receiving a rejection from the Boston Athletic Association, which informed her that women were incapable of running a marathon. The distance of a marathon was 26.2 miles. At the time, the longest official U.S. race that women were allowed to compete in was 1.5 miles. People worried that Bobbi would cause herself serious injury, and they thought she must be mentally ill. She finished the race ahead of about half the men who were running, with a time of 3 hours, 21 minutes, and 40 seconds. So that shows how people really believed that women couldn't do it. If the marathon distance was 26.2 miles and the longest race that women were allowed to run in was 1.5 miles, they really thought that running long distances was not something women were capable of. And that was in 1966. That wasn't that long ago. We're not talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We're talking in the 60s. Bobbi is still alive right now. So this isn't ancient history. This was pretty recent. Bobbi ran the marathon again in 1967 and 1968, joined each year by increasing numbers of women. In each of those years, Bobbi finished first among the women, leading to her being recognized by the Boston Athletic Association in 1996 as the pre-official women's winner for 1966, 67, and 68. So, in those years where other women were joining her running, they still weren't officially allowed to compete, but they were running to make a point. They wanted to prove themselves that women could do this and that they should be allowed to race. So, even if they couldn't technically win, or even if there wasn't officially a women's race, they were going to do it anyway. Bobbi went on to study philosophy and mathematics at the University of California, San Diego. She later did research at MIT while studying for her law degree. She has dedicated the rest of her life to researching the causes of and cures for neurodegenerative diseases. Bobbi splits her time between San Diego and Boston, where she writes, sculpts, paints, and of course, runs. So then I'll tell you a couple interesting things from the timeline. It says here in 1897 was the first Boston Marathon. 1966 was the year that Bobbi ran and finished the marathon for the first time. 1967, they accidentally gave a woman official entry, like they gave her her numbers and they had her name on the list. But then they disqualified her for being a woman and yanked her out of the race and said that it was a mistake and she still wasn't allowed to run. Then in 1972, there was a really important law passed. And that legislation, Title IX legislation, was signed into law. And it says, that law, that you can't discriminate against somebody because they're a man or they're a woman. You can't use their gender as a way to discriminate against them in sports, specifically in sports. So what that did, it made it so that college sports were opened up to women. They couldn't tell, like a university or a college, couldn't tell a woman that she couldn't play a sport because there was no women's team. They had to make it equal. So then later that same year, 1972, women are officially allowed to enter the Boston Marathon. So Bobbi and all of the other women that ran with her, they finally had their voices heard and they were allowed to officially enter. Then in 1975, the Boston Marathon becomes even more inclusive and they let people in wheelchairs enter. They have a wheelchair division. So they're including more and more people. Then finally, in 1984, they add a women's marathon to the Olympics. And then in 1996, so 30 whole years after Bobbi ran the marathon for the first time, they finally recognize her as the pre official winner for those years. So 30 years later, they finally said, okay, we were wrong. She was the winner for the women's division for those years. And then now, today, more than 12,000 women enter and run the Boston Marathon every single year. So sometimes it takes just one person to prove a point. Before 1966, before Bobbi, everyone just took it as the truth that women couldn't run a marathon, that they just weren't able to do it. Sometimes it just takes one voice, one person questioning something that everyone else accepts. Just takes one person saying, hey, I think that's wrong. I think we need to change that perception. And Bobbi is one of those people that did it. So, if you want to know more about the Boston Marathon or about Bobbi, I'm going to put some links into this description where you can go to find out more. But for now, that's the end of our library time for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you again next week. Take care. Miss you guys. Bye.